over to you.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me today. It's great to see lots of familiar faces, but it's much better to see lots of people I don't know, because if you were all familiar, it would mean you'd recruited no new activists since I left UNISON in 2007. So I always like to come to rooms where there's lots of new faces. A disclaimer at the start, really, references and descriptions I make to trade unions may not be those of UNISON, but if they do fit, please feel free to apply them. My kind of presentation I've described as random thoughts on organising today, so it will be a bit scattergun, but maybe it will sow some seeds and ideas for discussion through the day, throughout your workshops. And it will have a slight slant to it, given that tomorrow is International Women's Day, and I will talk about women and their role in organising as part of the presentation. We've heard about the need for unions to organise, the bad news stories. We always have to start union presentations with bad news stories. Slightly better news is that we're a little bit better here in the North West than anywhere else in the country, and it's down to unions like yourself committing themselves to going out and recruiting and organising members that we do that. The three things I want to touch on today really are what makes an organiser, how unions can support organising, and what barriers there are to changing and what barriers there are to activism. And I sometimes use the words activism and organising as interchangeable, because I think if we develop a culture where organising is the way we work, then activism and organising can be interchangeable. So what makes an organiser? Joe said it's difficult. It probably is, but I would argue that the skill sets of working class life are exactly the same skill sets that you require to be an organiser. And we've heard some examples of that already, but anyone who's ever fought the corner for someone in their community, anyone who's got something changed at their kids' school, anyone who's campaigned for a local youth club, anyone who in their workplace has said, no, I won't, and this is why I won't, and anyone who's said to somebody else, don't do it and I'll support you, has potentially got the skills to be an organiser. And one of those people, and I want to just mention today, was Jean Atkinson. Many of you'll know Jean. Jean was a branch secretary in UNISON. And Mick McEwen, who's here today, wrote a beautiful obituary of Jean this week. And just to quote from that obituary, Jean was one of those organisers. She recruited new activists to the union on the basis that you can do as much or as little as you want. Most of us were recruited in this way. Recall the little moving very rapidly to the much. And Jean never pushed herself forward or sought high office and was intensely annoyed by those who would use union platforms to showboat, make attacks on peoples rather than policies, or attempt to subvert union solidarity behind the scenes. But she was on every picket line and at every protest demonstration, large and small. And that's the kind of instinctive activism, I think, particularly women, but working class life gives us and that we can bring to the trade union movement. So it's not all about degrees, diplomas and courses, though they, I think, give you the tools that you need, they give you the confidence that you need, they give you the opportunity to share best practice. But I think the more we demystify what organising really means, the more we show it's natural for us and it's positive for us, and we combine that instinct with training, we will build the confidence of our organising. And that's where the role of unions comes in, doesn't it? It's about being able to open the doors to organisers and to clear the pathways for organising. And it might need us to have hard conversations within our own organisations, because we do still have, but I've done it for 50 years, cultures that sometimes can block that pathway. And we need to start to disengage lifetimes of activism from lifetimes of office holding sometimes, and say to our experienced activists, there's a new role for you in these organisations that we're building, there's a new role for you in these branches. And to look at the experience they've so valuably gained and the fights they've so valuably fought, and see how we use them positively. And I'll just touch on self-organisation as well, because I think self-organised groups have a really positive role to play to provide an alternative route into activism and to promote alternative ways of organising. But we have to make sure that they don't become rock pools that are disengaged from the main union, or they don't become simply power bases that don't do that kind of promotion and passing people through our structures. They need to be safe entry points into activism and into organising. Unions need to support them in that way, and our self-organised activists need to work in that way as well. And finally, I just wanted to say that we know the value of organising to a union. It's life and death to many unions. We're going to have to be doing it and doing it better. But there's also a value to the individual by being a union organiser, and particularly to women. And I suppose it takes me back to my starting point about life skills and experience and how valuable they can be. And what we learn as a trade unionist, we use in our life to change our society and to change our own instincts. And because tomorrow's International Women's Day, I want to quote from a man, but talking about women organisers, Stuart Acuff was an American organiser, and he talked about women organising in nursing homes in Texas. Nice easy job that, isn't it? Nursing homes in Texas. And what he said about the women who organised there is that Beverley nursing homes, newly represented by those women, bosses had to respect their employees or face a grievance and questioning from Beverley's corporate leaders. These women had changed the game, and the bosses had to talk to them and treat them differently. But the power they won from the job gave them confidence and courage and sisterly solidarity to confront more personal problems. Their biggest rewards came from their newfound sense of personal and collective empowerment, and they began to assert their dignity in their personal lives. They learned to stand up to their men and husbands. Some left abusive relationships. They were no longer the doormats too many of them had been their whole lives. They gained a whole new sense of self-respect. This, more than anything, was what sustained me during those tough Texas days and nights. And I think that shows the direct link between what we do as trade unions and our desire not just to change our organisations but to change society. So as Jean Acco would have said to you if she was here today, you can do as much or as little as you want, but for God's sake, make sure you do something.